Hello and welcome to this episode of Context. I'm Anastasia Lavrina. It's day 3 of Donald Trump's Gulf tour, and the headlines are anything but subtle. After defense mega deals in Qatar and a lavish motorcade that included Cybertrucks and fighter jets, the United States president has now arrived in the United Arab Emirates. But it was his unexpected meeting in Riyadh with Syria's interim leader and the announcement of lifted sanctions that truly shifted the global conversation. With Israel notably missing from his itinerary, the message seems clear. This is not diplomacy as usual. Today on Context, we are joined by Joana Ricardo in Portugal and Diogo Castro Silva in Sao Paulo, Brazil, to unpack what these both Gulf reset signals for regional alliances, international norms, and the global balance of power. So, dear experts, warm welcome to our program. And Joana, if you don't mind, let's start with you. The lifting of sanctions on Syria happened with zero multilateral coordination. For Europe that still clings to legalism and consensus in foreign policy, does this move expose just how sidelined the EU has become in hard power diplomacy?
Hello, good afternoon. Anastasia, Diogo, thank you for having me. Well, I'd say that first of all, it shows how diplomacy has played out in terms of the current US foreign policy. So what we have is clearly a type of foreign policy based on trading negotiations. We have the United States very much focused on how money is the main currency in diplomacy at this point. And we saw the Crown Prince of Saudi Arabia thanking Trump for this announcement, as it was clearly negotiated before and also as kind of a personal favor. So first point that I think that is a flagship point here is how the Saudi Arabia and other Gulf states managed to create a renewed relationship with the United States. And this has obviously a geopolitical impact, which is connected to the changing alliances and how Trump administration has downplayed, in a sense, what is the role of European allies and European partners, beginning with NATO, as we know, and now by taking those unilateral actions that are not coordinated with European powers. Another thing that is interesting to flag here, just to conclude my thinking, is that the European Union and the United Nations still consider that Mohammed al-Shara, Ahmed al-Shara, Mohammed is his previous jihadist name, is a terrorist. So since this sanction hasn't been lifted in terms of his association to terrorism, even though he has already dissolved Hayat Tahrir al-Sham, which was the organization that he led connected to Al-Qaeda previously, this is also obviously a big disruptive move.
Well, indeed, and that confirmed once again the behavior of Donald Trump in this particular issue will bring more concern in the European Union among the member states. But Diogo, the Gulf states are clearly capitalizing on global disorder to assert their power. For countries like Brazil, does this signal a new playbook for middle powers, one where alignment is less about ideology and more about pure strategic gain?
Well, hi to all. I think what we are witnessing is that the old order based on the rules-based system guaranteed by the United States has ended. So right now we have, and this is one of the reasons Trump feels so comfortable in the Gulf, a kind of king in the US, and more than that, the United States has no visible foreign policy process, so decisions are made in a kind of ad hoc fashion. And what you have besides this huge shift of the United States is, for other powers, they need to adjust to a very shifting landscape, and with a void created in the middle by the new U.S. foreign policy. So it's challenging. You are seeing great realignments of interests, and for other powers, including sizable ones like the European Union, is very challenging. But for others like Brazil, it's also a challenge just to keep up with the kind of geopolitical shifts you are witnessing. Regarding this visit of Trump to the Middle East and to the Gulf states, I think even more the Syria news are very relevant, but it's also the sideline of Israel, which points to new directions, which is, in my view, even more relevant.
Indeed, you already slightly answered my next question. You mentioned very interesting sentence, new U.S. foreign policy. Joanna, how should we interpret the symbolic weight of Trump excluding Israel from this tour?
Well, first of all, there is a symbolic weight for sure. So the official discourse at the White House is that there's nothing to read in between the lines. The White House says that this is just a commercial trip, so it is based on economic and trade investment deals, so it's got nothing to do with the previous relationship with Israel or the Israeli-Palestinian conflict per se. But in the end of the day, what we've been witnessing in these past days is the exact contrary. So we began with this surprise declaration of the lifting of sanctions in Syria that was followed actually by an in-person meeting between Ahmed al-Shara and the United States president, which is also unprecedented. On the other hand, we've heard many declarations on the relationship with Iran, which is also something that is part of the strategic desire of the Netanyahu administration, that is to expand the war towards Iran. So this is not in any way a secret. We all know it. This has been said in the past year and a half, but also historically. And the United States is also connecting now to the deal with Iran, which Donald Trump said today that is close. And this is also something to keep an eye on. And finally, we have the question of the Gaza war, which is, it's not outside of discourses. There is some rumors that the president of the United States might meet the president of the Palestinian Authority, Mahmoud Abbas, during this trip. And also, we've been listening a lot by the Gulf states on the question of the ceasefire and entering humanitarian aid. It's also always important to remember it's been 10 weeks since food, water, medicine, fuel, everything stopped entering the Gaza Strip because Israel has blocked it. And we have a huge catastrophic humanitarian crisis in Gaza unfolding nowadays. And Trump has spoken about this, has said that this is unacceptable. And this is also a change of narrative, which is clearly, in a sense, impacting Netanyahu's actions, because during this Donald Trump visit to the Middle East, Netanyahu has announced that it's going to enter with all military force in the Gaza Strip, and has also said that nothing will make him turn his back to his main objective, which is to destroy Hamas. Which is also an objective that clearly takes precedence over the lives of the hostages. So it seems to me that there's a lot to read, and that pressure over ceasefire might be unfolding together with these meetings, not because the Trump administration has changed its mind in any way regarding the way it stands on the conflict and the idea of a Riviera of the Middle East or anything like this, but because it's being pressured financially to do so, and Trump only speaks the language of money and power.
Yes, indeed, there are a lot of changes to observe, especially because since the beginning of his presidency term, there already been several proposals on the future development of the situation in Gaza. Well, Diogo, as we watch Qatar and the United Arab Emirates host defense deals and diplomatic surprises, do you see the Gulf emerging as a model for global South nations using neutrality as leverage rather than taking sides?
Well, if you allow me just to go back a second in the Israel, in the case of the Gulf states, I believe their situation is very unique because the structure of government, meaning personal decisions of a ruler, combined with money, combined with the strategic location, it's a very unique combination. And of course they are playing those cards well, but I would say it's a very hard model. It's a very unique model when you have these things together. Now, going back just a bit to the question of Israel, because I think it's super relevant. Trump has been making policy decisions. The agreement with the Houthis, separate from any agreement with Israel. The sacking of Mike Waltz, which many sources indicated was because Mike Waltz was pushing for an attack on Iran, coordinated with the Israelis. The question of Netanyahu doubling down in a conflict that Trump, not for any humanitarian sentiment, but it's just, I believe, in his view, just looks bad. And he already said it's a conflict that should end. So the persistence of Israel in pursuing the war with no clear end in sight. And of course there is an element, and there is always an element with Trump of a certain personal revenge with Netanyahu regarding his recognition of Biden's victory in 2022. And so this is all accumulating in an administration that can see the Arab states, namely Saudi Arabia and the Gulf states, as the primary ally in the Middle East and no longer Israel. In fact, the agreements that, the security agreement that's been designed with Saudi Arabia was initially conditional to an agreement with Israel. This now seems to be going away. So what you are seeing is a major realignment, which Trump seems keen to be doing by prioritizing Saudi Arabia and the Gulf states in the relation with the Middle East.
Joanna, how might other major powers actually respond to Trump's evolving Gulf posture?
Well, I was thinking about something Diogo said, especially related to the question of Brazil and these new alliances, which are also going to be impacted by this for sure. Because if you remember well, I guess it was in 2023 that Saudi Arabia and the United Arab Emirates were actually invited to join the BRICS, which is the economic but also ideological, in a sense, group that connects Brazil, Russia, India, China, and South Africa. It's a group that was created around 20 years ago precisely to create an option for Western, Northern dominance, both economically and socially in the world. And this is a group of emerging powers. It's a group that is expanding, and it's now connecting the Gulf states too. Trump is trying to enter, in a sense, this area of influence, which is also and has been part of the Russian area of influence, which is interesting. It's going to be interesting in the future to see how this will play out. But also the question of the types of deals that they've been making, because it's not just that there's been an approximation and that has been a different type of relationship between these countries, but also that it goes precisely in the fields of military intelligence, of defense, of security. So this is also something to pay attention to, because these powers, Saudi Arabia, Qatar, the Emirates, they are trying to broker a deal with the US that will strengthen their military and technological capacity in the fields of defense. So this is also something that Israel is clearly paying attention to, and that will certainly create a new configuration of power in the region, but also in terms of how the United States is connected to this. I'd also say that the European leaders are also paying attention to this, because while Trump has been sidelining NATO and saying that the European countries need to invest more in their defense, he's also contributing to enhance the Gulf states' investment into their own defense. So this is also something that we should be paying attention to, and also how this connects to the overall war in Ukraine, because what we've been seeing today is precisely that there's been a potential negotiation going on with a second-tier type of delegation coming from Russia, but it's also part of Turkish interests and also these countries' interests, and this is why the first round of indirect negotiations between Russia and Ukraine that have been taken over through the hands of the United States were placed precisely in Saudi Arabia.
Indeed, you touched a very important issue today's meeting in Turkey, the mediation in between of Russia and Ukraine. Diogo, I would like to listen your opinion on the same matter, and overall, how do you expect the global powers, let's say China and Russia, may decide and may react on the Gulf's realignment?
Well, the Gulfs have been doing a balancing act for many years between. I would say Russia is less relevant in the sense of a global power projection, but of course China is extremely relevant. And the Gulf states have been doing this variably, not only the Gulf states, but Saudi Arabia. I mean, Joanna indicated the joining in the BRICS. Also, one thing important is the Saudi Arabia in particular is much more open than in the past with the with the kind of kind of agreement with Iran that can go a long way in cooling down the Sunni-Shia rift in the Middle East, and the UAE was always more reticent. Now it's coming along, so this is one reason they are pushing for the pursuing of talks with Iran, something again that Israel doesn't want. Russia is now much less relevant. I mean, Syria, the Syria situation has gone in another direction outside of Russia control. So Turkey is now the relevant, let's say, outside player in Syria, playing a big game of supporting the actual government, and the Gulf states in Saudi Arabia have been very able to carve their own space. I mean, if one remembers 20 years ago, the relation between Saudi Arabia and the United States was one of much more dependence in terms of foreign policy. Today you have a much more assertive, independent foreign policy of Saudi Arabia, which is the most relevant player of all this group of countries. And this is what is happening right now, and I will see this continuing in the future with the Saudi Arabia and the Gulf states cozying up in groups like the BRICS, but at the same time maintaining a very close strategic relation with the United States.
Well, Joanna, previously it was mentioned that this Trump's tour, it's more about developing of the business relations, and talking about the Gulf states, we cannot ignore the fact of energy diplomacy. Is energy diplomacy from the Gulf a warning sign for countries' commodity-dependent economies, or can it serve as a model for negotiating from a position of strength?
The question of energy has been, since day one of the key issues in Donald Trump's agenda. So one of the first presidential acts that he signed was one that considered the United States was in an energy crisis situation. And this is also connected to the question of the European relationship with the US, because the US seems also to be interested to enter the energy sector in Europe to sell energy, and also to the question of the war in Ukraine because of Russia's relationship with European countries in the matter of energy. This is also the case in the Gulf states, and the question that we've been seeing, in a sense, a reconfiguration of the energy and technological industries, if you want, in terms of the trade relationships, especially because Saudi Arabia also brokered an accord with the United States for the construction of nuclear power plants, and also the question of how this impacts the technological system, because we are also seeing some red signs from the United States coming from the intelligence agency connected to the selling of technology, and how this impacts also secrecy in terms of the technological system. So not being an expert on the energy field, I'd say that this is obviously something to keep an eye on, especially in this situation in which we have the United States trying to reconfigure their interests in the fields of energy and technology.
And Diogo, my last question, does this suggest a broader weakening of Western diplomatic coalition? I mean, overall, this Trump's Middle East tour, just to conclude our today's conversation.
Well, it's clearly a weakening, because the definition of what we consider the West has shifted. The West for 80 years had been represented the rules-based order, which was led by the United States, which in fact guaranteed that this rules-based order existed with the several principles: no change of borders, multilateralism, global institutions. The fact that the US is now, in terms of not only the policy, but the way the policy is formulated, which is a very personalistic way outside of any national security policy process, outside of any systematic approach. So this very personalistic approach, this makes the US behave in a much more way aligned with monarchical systems like in the Middle East, or even autocratic systems like in Russia. So you have this, so what we thought is the West is today kind of reduced to Europe, the European Union, and some Asian nations like Japan, South Korea, the Australia, New Zealand. So that is what we in the past defined as the West. Today, the United States is a kind of more, is not in that same kind of philosophical framework. And this is why this is so disruptive and very difficult for policymakers, especially in democratic and liberal democratic nations, to react appropriately, because they are in a way still reasoning in the previous system of process, rules, engagements, commitments, multilateral approaches. We just saw this in this week with the Russian-Ukrainian war, where an agreed posture between Europe, Kyiv, and Washington on Saturday was then ditched 2 days afterwards by Trump demanding that Zelensky had to go to Istanbul. So it's a very fluid situation. Alliances are shifting, and it's particularly hard for systems that rely on laws and processes, for countries that rely on laws and process to react appropriately, because like I said, they are still reasoning in the previous system rules, which they clearly do no longer apply.
Well, indeed very interesting, and we will continue following the outcomes of this Trump's visit to the Middle East. Dear expert, thank you so much for being with us today.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks. So, as Trump continues his Gulf tour, the world watches not just for the next handshake, but for the tectonic shifts they may represent. With old alliances shaken and new ones taking shape, the path forward remains uncertain, but undeniably significant. From Portugal to Brazil, our thanks to tonight's guest. I'm Anastasia Lavrina, this is Context, and see you next time.